Welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast with me, your host, Christian Harris. It's Sliptember, which is the time of year that I spend a big amount of time focusing on my niche area of slips and falls. So Sliptember being a play on words, obviously, for September, if the joke wasn't obvious. And so over the next few weeks, we're going to have some focused episodes of the podcast thinking about slips and falls, primarily being driven by the Safety Roundtable events that I run every Wednesday morning. Come and join us at 9 o'clock. You can find the details at safetyroundtable.co.uk. And so today we start by discussing the slip problem. And in this case, SLIP is an acronym. And I'll explain as we get into it what that means, but it's an acronym around the misperceptions that drive slips and falls to be such a big crisis, both human cost and financial cost as well. I'm going to explain what the acronym of SLIP stands for, give you some statistics, share some stories as well to bring the human element and the heart into this, and give you some ideas of steps you can take that are practical and pragmatic, and approaches and philosophies to think about how you can actually go about reducing the risk of slips and falls in your building. Hope you enjoy it, and I will see you again on the other side of the intro music. Cheers.
Welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast with Christian Harris. We believe that proactive safety and risk management powers business performance. Each week we explore this theme, sharing guests, stories, insights, trends, hints and tips. You can find us on all the major podcasting platforms, and video versions are available on YouTube. But for now, let's join the conversation with Christian.
Thanks for joining me today to talk about the slip problem. And SLIP, as we'll hear, is an acronym. But we are talking about slips and falls today, and that's because it's Sliptember, which is my favourite time of the year, where I get to geek out on slips and falls all month long as a way of trying to raise awareness about this issue. Last year, actually, we were delighted to come second in a big national awards ceremony for our Sliptember campaign. We lost out to BAE Systems, which is obviously a massive behemoth of a company, so to come second to them was a good achievement. But it was great to get the recognition for what we do each September in trying to use it as a platform to raise awareness about this issue. So let's start then with thinking about the size and scope of the slip problem. And many people would overlook this because there's this perception that perhaps there aren't as many of these kinds of accidents as the reality would suggest there is. So I'll run through a few figures for you. In the workplace in the UK, there's a broken bone every 3 minutes after a slip. So that's a lot of people, dozens of people suffering broken bones every day. Each year there are 300,000 admissions to A&E after a slip. In a normal time, a non-COVID year, that's the second biggest cause of admission. The biggest cause of admission to A&E, funnily enough, is where someone's been discharged and then they go back in shortly thereafter. So perhaps they've been discharged too soon. But in terms of standalone events where somebody is ostensibly well, and then suffers some thing happening to them, which means they need to go to hospital. Slips is the biggest cause of that. Those 300,000 admissions lead to 1.5 million NHS bed days. And to give you an idea, that costs the NHS, and therefore you and I, if you're a UK taxpayer like me, hundreds of pounds per bed day. Each year there are around a dozen amputations after slips. There are also deaths occasionally. Brain injuries, and very much so serious injuries at that end of the scale. So there's some of the human costs, excuse me, of slips. If we come down to thinking about more of the sort of financial economic costs, in most sectors, slips are around a third of accidents, injuries and claims. There's over £1 billion a year of insurance claims costs in the UK each year, and the average claim is about £10,000 for public liability, of which those are the majority. If you've got an employer's liability, the claim typically is a bit higher. But whilst we have insurance, many costs that we incur after accidents or incidents are not covered by our insurance. It could be we have an excess, like you might have on your home insurance or your car insurance, in which case you might have to pay the first £5,000 of any claim, for example, just like you might have to pay the first £500 of any home insurance claim. But there are also other costs which aren't covered by insurance. So insurance doesn't cover every single cost. And then we also see, and I posted about this yesterday, we also see criminal fines. So if you're in court, you're either in court for a civil case or a criminal case. So a civil case would be somebody slips and falls and brings a claim against your insurance company, or you and your insurance company. A criminal case would be where typically the HSE, or it could be a council, brings a criminal prosecution against you. And we've seen a number of six-figure fines. The most recent sort of high-profile one was Tesco in 2020, just before the pandemic, where they were fined just under £750,000 after someone slipped and broke their hip. So it's a big problem, just setting the scene. If you've not come across me before, or if it's your first time joining us on one of these sessions, just give you a quick intro, particularly relevant to today because I'm going to be talking about kind of my area of expertise. So my name's Christian Harris. I lead a business called Slip Safety Services. Every week I do quite a lot of content, podcast, roundtable, newsletters, posts, articles, webinars, and all that sort of stuff. Often people ask me how I can do a day job when I'm doing all of this stuff. I specialize in the field of slips. I've worked in some high profile cases in this area, and I'm going to give you a bit more background on my slip credentials in a second. We, as I mentioned, have won some awards and come second in some other awards, but we have won awards too. We work with some key stakeholders like AXA Insurance, some great clients like Network Rail, CPRE. Over the years, we've helped several thousand sites to reduce their slip risk, and at last count, we are helping them to save around £10 million a year of claim costs. Some of the stuff that I've done over and above that, I've worked on innovative and technological ways of trying to solve this problem in a bit more depth. So I've created a tool which I'm going to talk to you about later called a slip prevention scorecard, which is a digital self-assessment diagnostic tool. So you can just spend, takes about 3.5 minutes, answer some questions, and it gives you a good baseline for where you're at in terms of how you're performing at reducing slip risk. I've created, in partnership with some insurance companies, a digital learning management system all around slips and falls, which includes tools, training, tracking, which is called the Safer Portal, and that's just starting to roll out in the UK and will start to go around the world. I've helped to create guidance for bodies such as the Leisure Expert Panel and the UK Slip Resistance Group around how to manage and mitigate slip risk. And my big goal, I suppose, when it comes to this area, bearing in mind what a big problem it is, as I've just said, is to have an impact of 500,000 people. So I want to see, and I can't do this on my own, but I want to see a reduction of 500,000 slip and fall accidents around the world. That's my big vision and the big goal that I'm aiming towards. And that's kind of why I do all of this stuff. It's why I do Sliptember, to raise awareness, because that's a big, hairy, audacious goal, and I need you guys to help me do it. So why is slips and falls such a big problem? And here's the big idea for today. The insight that I've gleaned over the 10 plus years I've been working in this field is that it's a big problem because we just don't approach this issue in the right way. We have beliefs about it that actually are incorrect and are holding us back. And if we can just get over these beliefs, that's when we can have these kind of light bulb moments, change the way we think, change the way we do things. And that's when we can actually, I'm just going to mute everyone. And that's when we can make a big impact. And the four misconceptions that I see again and again and again, I've summarized in this acronym of SLIP. So S for simple, L for low cost, I for impossible to solve, P for poultry. So these are the beliefs that people have that we need to try to overcome. Let's run through those. So the first thing is slips are simple. And this is a myth that is perpetuated constantly, and even by people who should know better. We're always told there are simple things you can do to stop slips. There are low-cost things you can do to stop slips, and people make it seem like it's the easiest thing in the world to have a big impact. And the reality is that it isn't quite as simple as many people think. What does this sound like? Just stick a sign out and you're fine. It's covered. You're covered for that. Reality, very different. Signage can be helpful, but if you put a sign out on a floor that you know is going to get wet, that doesn't cover you at all, because your obligation is to either prevent access to that floor when it's wet or make it safe to walk upon when it's wet, because you know that it's wet. So yellow signs aren't enough. There's a quote here from Cornwall Council. Signage alone is not an adequate control. Spillage control isn't enough on its own. It's good on certain areas of floors. I'm going to talk about this later. Floors that are dry and designed to be dry and constantly dry, and only occasionally going to get wet through some kind of spillage. What's that beeping? I think it might be my... let me see if I can turn this off. Don't know if I can actually. Anyway, we'll just have to have a bit of beeping background. I'm not sure everybody else can hear it, but I'm hearing some beeping. Yeah, so spillage control isn't enough. Cleaning records aren't enough, but these are the things that people kind of expect to cover them. So it's okay, I've got my yellow sign. It's okay, I've got spillage control. It's okay, I've got cleaning records. I talk about this slip and fall iceberg. So above the waterline is what people see and what people do. And these are all kind of useful things to do, but they're all equally relatively superficial things to do as well. And it's not until you go and start diving deep and go below the waterline that you can really start to make a good impact in this area. We're going to talk about some of these things today, and next week as well, we're going to be talking about chimes in a lot of detail. So I would term this as subtle, but not simple. So what I would never say is, to stop slip and falls in your buildings, you need to make wholesale changes, hugely expensive changes, do fundamental shifts to your culture, things like that. That's not realistic. It's never going to happen. The changes that you need to make are subtle, but I would say they're not simple. So we need to be moving away from thinking that slips are simple, and start to think of them in a bit more detail, start diving a bit below the water. The L in slip is that slips are low cost. So what does this sound like? It's okay, our insurance company will cover it. Slips aren't expensive anyway. We've kind of covered a bit of this in the introduction, but to give you an idea, we work with AXA, and there's an article on AXA's website where it says, I think from 2018, that slips was their number one cost of claim, which was 80 million, 80. Their number two cost was manual handling, which was 30 million, 30. and then everything else was below that. So lots of places of work focus a lot on manual handling, but actually slips is more than twice as big a problem. It's almost 3 times as big a problem as manual handling. Could you stand here or sit here with your hand on your heart and honestly say that you're putting commensurate effort into slips? Are you putting 3 times as much effort into slips as manual handling? I suspect the answer is no. Some of these other costs we've covered, there's the human costs, there's the criminal costs, and there's the hidden uninsured cost as well. And interestingly, something like maybe 20-25% of your insurance premium, your sort of liability insurance premium, is likely to be attributed to potential slips and falls. So if you can get a grip of this and get a handle on it and actually start to put together a compelling story and evidence as to what you're doing on slips, and you can show improvement in these areas, then there's some significant potential savings you can make from your insurance bill as well. Slips are impossible to prevent. I hear this a lot. There's nothing we could do. The floor was wet. Whatever you do, you're bound to get slip accidents. People just kind of think these incidents are inevitable. The reality is that isn't the case at all. And we, over the years, have helped, as I said, thousands of sites to reduce the risk. Here are a few examples. A swimming pool operator where we helped them to reduce their claims volumes from 1 per week to 1 per month. That's a massive saving. That's a £400,000 a year saving based on £10,000 average claim. Shopping centre managed to help them to eliminate accidents. And I'm saying we helped them because what we do is not it's not as if we've got this magic wand and we can wave it and it solves all of your problems. We can support you and help you and work with you, but it does need to, there are elements that you would need to do as well. Train station, 60% fewer accidents. Restaurant group, 55% fewer accidents. Hotel that was having a lot of slips in bathtubs, 85% fewer accidents. College, 95% reduction in claims volumes. This college actually was struggling to get insurance. No insurance company wanted to touch them because of their claims history of slips. And we managed to actually eradicate slips for about 18 months. And then, over a sort of 3 to 5 year period, it was a 95% reduction. So they were certainly happy with that. So you absolutely can stop slips. And P, slips of poultry. Poultry, I had to find a word with P to make the acronym work, but poultry means insignificant or not very serious. So, what does that sound like? Loads of people slip over, but very few get hurt. Here are a few examples of where that isn't the case, and these are all in the last few years. So Stanley May slipped and banged his head and died in a supermarket in when was it, 2014, I think, 2013, 2014, 2015. That led to a £400,000 fine. A lady, Irena there, who slipped in a shower and died. Malcolm here, who lost his leg. I mentioned amputations. Famous tennis player who slipped in the locker room at the US Open and had a concussion. Last year, was it last year or the year before? There were lots of players slipping on the courts at Wimbledon, but thankfully nobody was injured too badly. And even close to home, one of my best friends suffered a serious slip. She was about 7 months pregnant with her second child. She was in the playground, and she slipped over on when it was a little bit wet on a surface that really should never have been there. It was a smooth surface, and it was on a slope, and bad design. Anyway, she slipped and she shattered her ankle. She was in a wheelchair. Bearing in mind she's 7 months pregnant. She ended up giving birth to her daughter, and then had a quick cuddle for an hour, and then was put under to have her ankle repaired, and just had a horrendous, her and her husband had a horrendous, more so her of course, had a horrendous time of it for for what should have been, one of the happiest moments of their lives, having a child, and actually it was ruined by a slip. So, trust me when I say slips are serious. So I've set the scene there. It's not exactly a rosy start to a Wednesday morning. A bit of an apocalyptic scene and background that I've shared there in terms of some of the problems that we face. But the good news is that there is a sunny sunrise coming over the horizon in the next section of the presentation. So there are things we can do. It might sound difficult, but there definitely are things we can do to reduce these problems. So the first thing is around how we frame this and communicate it. The first piece of advice I'd give. So what I talk about is this point that the truth is that slips are serious, scientific, and stoppable. So if we can bear those 3 points in mind at all times, and if we can communicate those points to stakeholders, if we can frame slips in the right way, that they are serious, they are scientific, and they are stoppable, then that's how we can help to break this chain of misperception. From a practical perspective, I've got four T's, four things you can do that begin with T, that I'm going to share with you that will help you to actually take some action to break this cycle. So the first one is tune your chimes, and I'm not going to go into too much detail about this because I'm going to talk about chimes in much more depth next week on the safety roundtable. But chimes is another acronym, and these are the 6 reasons why people slip. So C stands for contamination, H is for heal, I is individual, M is maintenance, E is environment, and S is surface. And what I've seen, another insight for you over the last 10 years, is that where organisations are doing well at managing slips and falls, they've got certain things in common, and those things are that they do well on these 6 areas. Not necessarily all 6, but they do well on average across all 6. And conversely, when I go in to help to diagnose and understand what's going on with a prospective client that is suffering with slip and fall accidents, injuries and claims, when we analyse this, we find that they're not doing very well on these 6 areas, or they might be doing it well on only 1 or 2 of them. So these are the kind of commonalities, these are the principles, these are the areas that you need to focus on, chimes, and join me next week, and I'm going to deep dive into those and give you some very practical tips on each point, but this just sets a bit of a framework for you. So again, we're going below the waterline. We're not thinking superficially, we're going below, we're looking at the root causes, and then we're going to start to see what we can do to alleviate issues for each of them. The next thing is to treat your flaws zonally. So here's another simple, in inverted commas, subtle thing to do, which is that 95% of your flaws in an average building, every building is going to be slightly different, but 95% of flaws on average are not likely to get routinely wet or contaminated. And therefore, in those areas, we don't need to worry so much about this stuff. Okay, so we need to bear in mind how we're cleaning and maintaining the floors, because we don't want to make them become too slippery. We don't want to turn them into a hazard. We definitely need to be thinking about spillage control in those areas. But actually, we should be focusing our effort on the 5% of the floors. So we're not talking Pareto principle here, 80-20. We're actually talking 5%. And those would include entrances, washrooms, external areas, kitchens, manufacturing areas, loading bays, wet leisure, so swimming pools, changing rooms, excuse me, showers and bathtubs, hotel bathroom floors, food service areas, things like that. So any environment, any area that is likely to get wet or contaminated consistently, these are the parts of the building that you should focus on when it comes to trying to mitigate your slip risk. Even HSE would not say to you that all floors need to be slip resistant. Yeah, so we need to focus in on the 5%. The next T would be to test your floors. So if you are relying on how a floor looks or how you perceive a floor to be in terms of safety, then you're missing a trick and you're liable to suffer a problem, because even I, who's been doing this and only doing this for sort of 12 years, cannot look at a floor and know just by looking at it whether it's safe when wet or not. I've probably got a better chance of doing that than a layperson might have, but even I cannot know just by looking at a floor whether it's safe or not. The only way to know is by doing a test. And what you'll find is that many floors look, in inverted commas, slip resistant, but never were. So in other words, you could have a surface that it has a sort of texture or a waviness or something to it, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's enough to give it slip resistance. So many floors you might believe are slip resistant, but they never were. Or floors may well have been slip resistant when they were installed, but for various reasons over the years, typically wear and tear and cleaning or ineffective cleaning, they might look slip resistant, and they may have been slip resistant, but they're not performing as slip resistant now because they've either changed a characteristic or they've become overly contaminated. So testing your floors is really important. This is a diagram on the screen here of a tool called a pendulum test. This is what's used by the HSE. It's what's used by the courts. It basically mimics what happens when a heel strikes a floor, which is when somebody slips. You can test any floor in situ, even on ramps. You can use it to assess how effective your cleaning regime is. There are other tests available, but this is the one that is the gold standard. What I always say about other tests is, the point is that if you're standing up in court with another test that says the floor is safe, and you're against a HSE inspector with a pendulum test that says the floor is unsafe, then there's only going to be one winner of that argument. So there are merits to doing other tests. Trust me, my team and I don't like lugging around these massive boxes with heavy pendulum tests in them. We'd much rather have something that's quicker, easier, lighter, etc. But when it comes down to it, this is the data you need. The output of the test is a number called a pendulum test value, or PTV, and basically you can correlate that to a risk exposure. There are three categories of slip potential: high, which is anything up to a PTV of 24, moderate, which is a PTV of 25 to 35, and low, which is a PTV of 36 plus. And if you've got a PTV of 24, then you've got a 1 in 20 risk exposure, according to some research that the HSE did. Whereas if you've got a PTV of 36 or above, then there's a 1 in a million risk exposure to an accident. So without the testing, you don't know where you stand on this scale. With the testing, I would suggest that, whatever the result of the test, you should look at it as a positive. If you're in the green section, of course, that's a positive because you now have got the proof that your floors are safe. If you're down in the red or in the amber zone, the high or moderate categories, that also should be considered a positive because at least now you know and you can do something to try to reduce the risk, hopefully before a serious accident happens. A couple of quotes here. One's from me, which I say a lot, which is, without the pendulum test data, you can only ever be guessing at how safe your floors are. And another from David Scott, who I've had on my podcast before. He's a lawyer and helps to defend insurance claims in the leisure and hospitality sector. If you've got compliant slip test data, you should expect to defend that claim. So that's the power of the test. One is you can figure out and scientifically know whether you're safe or not. But the other point is once you are safe and you can prove it and document it and evidence it with the test data, you're in a very, very strong position to defend claims. And the last T I'd recommend you to do is to take what we call the slip prevention scorecard. So what we've done is we have developed this digital tool, and it's a quiz basically. So you log on, it's totally free. You log on and you answer a series of questions. It takes about 3.5 minutes, and we ask you questions about contamination, heal, individual, maintenance, environment, and surface. And then what you get is a score for each of those categories. So you get this baseline for how you're currently doing on slip prevention in your building. And then with that information, you can make an informed decision on where you need to place your effort. So I'd certainly recommend doing that, because that's going to be a great starting point for you to figure out where you currently are, and then what you need to do in terms of a roadmap to move forwards. Just quickly, why am I pretty passionate about this, and why do I care about safety so much? It's because back in 2012, I suffered an accident that wasn't my fault, and so I know how life-altering and disruptive and frankly horrendous it is when something bad happens to you that you weren't expecting and that you had no real control over. I was run over by a car that lost control and mounted the curb, so it wasn't a slip. As I said earlier, one of my best friends has suffered a really serious slip, so I'm sure she's pretty passionate about this as well now. But if you look at the data, as I said earlier, and you want to make an impact, if you want to be stopping people from getting hurt, well, why not start in the area where most people are getting hurt? So that's my why, I suppose. That's the reason that I'm really interested in this, because I've had that was me in the hospital afterwards. This photo on the screen, if you're watching live, I've had a bad accident. I've suffered one of these things, and so I want to help people to not suffer that themselves. So thinking about the slip problem then, and what I've shared with you today in terms of both sides of the issue, but also some of these potential solutions, what's the opportunity here? Well, from your perspective, if you resonate with this, if this has landed with you, if you're pulled to this and you're keen to try to help to overcome this slip problem, I would see two kind of opportunities here. The first is pretty quick, which is that actually if you can grab the metal here and you can start to drive improvements, be proactive, be scientific, you're going to reduce your risk basically immediately, because the sooner you start to look at your chimes, the sooner you do the scorecard, the sooner you get the slip testing, the sooner you focus in on the 5% of areas where you're most likely to make an impact. Just by being proactive, just by focusing on this, you are going to make an immediate impact, because as soon as you do something that reduces your risk by even 0.5%, that has an effect straight away on the people using your floors. And then there's a longer term opportunity here as well, which I would summarize as in 4 ways. So firstly, you're going to have less harm, so fewer people are going to be getting injured, which if you're involved in safety, which you probably are if you're watching this, listening to this, then that has to be high up on your agenda. The second couple of things I would say are more personally beneficial. So if you think about the sheer amount of time and effort that it takes to deal with incidents, filling in forms, investigating accidents, and so on and so forth, if we can do something to have a big impact on slip and fall risks in your business, then that is going to save you time, and it's going to give you the ability to be more focused. And when I speak to safety leaders, particularly more senior safety leaders, one of the challenges that they have is that they want to focus on kind of strategic stuff, but they get trapped in this kind of day-to-day of accident, claim, investigation, etc. So if we can lift you and elevate you out of that situation, that's going to be a good thing. And then, of course, lower costs. So we talked about claims costs. We talked about potential prosecution costs. We talked about the potential upside of saving money on your insurance premiums as well. So these are the four big sort of longer term opportunities of getting to grips with this slip problem. Next steps then, if this has landed with you, what I would suggest you do is go and use the slip prevention scorecard. Takes a few minutes, it's totally free. Get your scores. This will start to get your mind whirring and thinking about where you currently stand in your business and what you can do to reduce the risk. And then once you've done that, let's hop on a call. We can have a one-to-one. We can look at your report, and I can share with you some of the things we've learned from other clients in similar sectors to you, or indeed in totally different sectors to you, but where we see different profiles of scores. So if you're scoring well on individual and heel and maintenance, but not so well on contamination, environment and surface, well, what does that mean, and what can you do about it? And again, that's something that I'm happy to do. There's no cost to having that discussion, and I'll try and point you in the right direction and give you some of the benefits of my expertise. The other thing I'd love for you to think about is Sliptember and how you could maybe help. So one of our regular attendees to the roundtable, Michelle, reached out to me last week, and we're doing some stuff internally for her business around Sliptember, which is great. Love doing things at a business level. I'm not just head in the sky, head in the clouds here. But is there anything we could do around maybe doing a webinar, publicizing this in some way, or if you've got any other ideas, then do reach out to me, and I'd be really happy to talk about what we can do to promote Sliptember. As I said at the start, my big goal is to have an impact of 500,000 people. I can't do that on my own. I don't think I can even do that in the UK, bearing in mind there's 300,000 A&E admissions. So this is going to be a global effort, and really keen to work with people to drive this forward. So summing up then, and then we're going to go into any Q&As or questions or comments. And I can see there's a few things going off on some of the social media, so I'll have a look at those as well. I suppose to sum up, I've talked about the problem. I've talked about some of the solutions. I've talked about some of the benefits that you can get from doing that. I've given you a bit of my sort of personal story and why I'm really interested in this. Just to sum up from our perspective, I mean, what I and my team are known for is really passionately caring about this particular niche problem that not many people care about, which is solving in a scientific way this big problem. So bear in mind, that's what we do. We're very focused, and that's where we love to be. And in doing that, what are we trying to achieve? Of course, we're trying to achieve some impact in terms of figures and statistics, but actually what we want to do for our clients is to leave them with a feeling of confidence, of clarity, of certainty, of comfort, so that they kind of feel safer, basically, so they know that they've got this risk under control. So thanks for that. I hope that was useful, valuable. If anybody's got any comments, questions, I'd love to dive into that and make this turn into something a bit more interactive. Simon has got something. He said he sent me a DM. He wants to say something in the Q&A. Now, let me. What I need to do is. Oh, you've unmuted. So that's okay. Sometimes when I mute everybody, then it won't let you unmute. Let me stop sharing. How are you, Simon?
Yeah, tickety. I can't always get onto these things, but I managed to make it on this morning.
Good stuff.
Hello. If you've got a couple of minutes, just a few bits and bobs notes I've made on here. It
Yeah.
might be of use to you and some of the guys on here as well. So happy to keep the information up. Just for information, my name's Simon Cutmore. I'm not selling anything. I work for insurance brokers. I'm a risk manager. I'm a chartered insurance practitioner, chartered safety and health practitioner, all the letters, fellowships, all that kind of stuff. But this slip thing is a big thing for us as well. I've made a few notes. It's quite ironic and quite funny, actually, because I'm currently recovering from a broken ankle where I was actually out for a run, and I was going around the canal towpath. I went to avoid a coot that was protecting its family, and I rolled on my ankle. And if you roll on your ankle really, really hard, really hard, it doesn't just do the ligament, it actually snaps the bottom off your fibula.
And it hurts.
So, and it hurts like hell. So just to re-echo some of Christian's comments, some of the things that crop up as about that, I couldn't go to site, for example, because I couldn't wear PPE because I had a boot on. It affects driving. Luckily, I've got an automatic and it was my left leg. Yes, of course, there's still the pain, there's still the swelling. I've got nerve damage that's not expected to clear for 18 months. And I'm not quite so much of an active triathlete now, but I am an active runner and cyclist, and that's been for months. So I'm just getting fat now. So that just really says, yeah, that it's not just on the things that you think of. There's a lot of things that affect you as well. The other point I'd make when you mentioned on pendulum testing, and this is something we came across, great idea, fantastic, and there's stuff with higher than 36, etc. But I think you also need to consider, and I don't think you mentioned this specifically, Christian, that you also need to look at combination of surfaces. So a surface when wet will be very different from a surface that's dry, and that can radically alter the pendulum test. One thing we found years ago was an anti-slip floor. It was absolutely brilliant in the wet and the dry, way exceeded 36. I think the figures were 69 and 62, dry and wet respectively. However, corn flour completely negated the slip resistance. So as soon, it was a pizza place, so as soon as you put corn flour on the floor, you're basically walking on ice, and people are falling A over T. So you need to look at a combination of factors, which kind of neatly leads me into the final thing I was going to talk about just briefly. Sorry, I'm hijacking you a little bit here.
No, that's all right. That's good.
With the current cost of living and energy issues, we're beginning to see the embryonics of some stuff coming out. People now, they've got kids to feed, they've got Christmas coming up, they want to go on a holiday, they've got bills to pay, huge electric bills, and because of that, they're becoming a little more receptive to making claims. Let's put it that way.
More litigious, yeah.
Yeah, so, and they know with no fee solicitors, let's have some of that, you know. But that also brings on some other things. People are also seeking to control the risks that they have to their premises, businesses and domestic, but business is what I'm concerned with here. And they're seeking alternative energy suppliers because they don't want to pay out all this money because of Putin's invasion, whatever. And a lot of that is going into, I think, some type wind, but a lot of it's going into solar as well. So people are looking at solar. Now, there are a whole host of risks associated with solar, which I'm not going to go into here. But what I will go into is that when you're putting solar, it goes on the roof. If it goes on the roof, you have to get up to the roof. If you're going to get up to the roof, you have to go up on scaffolding. Scaffolding is lovely and it's fantastic and it's very safe, but it's outside and it chucks it down with rain. And because I've got it outside my house, because I've just had solar panels fitted, and when it rains, it gets incredibly slippery. And you've got these poor lads up there trying to eat a bacon sandwich going up the ladder. It's a terribly dangerous place up on roofs. So we know that that's a major issue. The boards, the poles, everything are quite bad. And of course, if you do have an accident on the scaffold, the chances are it's going to be not just a slip trip, but you're going to fall from height as well, which means you start talking about big dents in heads and smashed up people and people not having nice Christmases. So I just really wanted to highlight, if any of you guys out there are sort of thinking of alternative energy supplies, that maybe that's a thing you need to factor in, because if it's anything you've done that's not right, that's negligent, that has allowed something to happen and somebody to fall, I appreciate the scaffolds are professionals, but you know, there are people out there who are struggling to pay bills and they will seek to have a pop at you if they possibly can. That's me. Hopefully that was of some use to somebody.
Thank you, Simon. No, that was good. And just to add to your point around the economic stuff going on, there are also some other big trends. You know, there's an aging population, for example, which is really important because people are now more active later in life. But the sad reality is that it doesn't matter if you're an active 70-year-old or a less active 70-year-old, but once you're 70, if you slip and fall and break your elbow or your ankle or your wrist or something like that, sadly, Father Time is going to be cruel to you. So the older people are, the more likely they are to have a more serious accident, a more serious injury, and therefore the more laborious and lengthy and costly their recuperation will be, and therefore the cost of any sort of claim is going to be higher as well. So both from an employee perspective, because people are working later in life, and from a customer perspective, because people are swimming and shopping and doing all these other fun things, leisure things later in life, more so than they would years and years ago. There is a kind of increased risk that we need to be aware of there, I would say. And there are some also some other things which are more in the sort of insurance realm than the safety realm, but we have seen changes, to some positive changes, some negative changes around some of the costs associated with claims. So there's been a reduction of some legal fees, speeding up of some things, but also there's been an increase in expenses, the way that expenses are calculated. So all of these things are kind of moving and shaking in the background as well, that are driving potential issues up. Does anybody else have anything they want to hop in and contribute on? Because we are coming up for quarter two. As I said at the start, I'm having a nice focus on slips this month. So next week, I think I said as well, next week we're going to be talking about chimes and doing a bit more of a deep dive into chimes. And some of the points that Simon actually made will come out in this, because thinking about the fact that floors are different under different types of contamination, thinking about how surfaces interact with each other. Many slips and falls happen at intersections of different surfaces, because if you're walking on a particular surface, when you're walking, you don't think about walking, you just walk. And that's because your brain has attuned itself to the surface you're walking on. And so when you change from one surface to another, if that surface is much more slippery, then that can prove to be a challenge as well. So next week, looking forward to doing a deep dive into these chimes, the 6 causes of slips, and give you a lot more detail on those. In the meantime, I'd certainly recommend going on and doing the slip prevention scorecard, because that will give you a score, so you can start to see where you are on each of these, and then you can pay more attention next week when I'm doing a deep dive on the areas that are relevant to you. The web address, by the way, for that is scorecard.slipsafety.co.uk. That's scorecard.slipsafety.co.uk. So join us next week. We're going to be talking about chimes on the Safety Roundtable. You can sign up at safetyroundtable.co.uk. If you're listening to this on the podcast, join us next week as well for another slip-related episode. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for joining us on the Safety and Risk Success podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please hit follow and do share on social media. Does anyone you know spring to mind as a great guest, even yourself? If so, please contact us on podcast@slipsafety.co.uk. See you next week for another episode.